think the reason that the freedom of the press and free expression are so important is that to be able to exercise your voting rights properly, you need to know what people stand for, but also what their record is. And politicians obviously pitch to the electorate. They say what they think voters would want to hear. They also say what they genuinely mean. There's a mixture of it. The only way that you can know whether they're telling you the truth and whether they're trustworthy is if you're able to find out what they've actually done and how they've acted on previous promises and so on. So I think that the idea that we can actually find out what people are doing, not just politicians either, but large companies and the people who actually have a huge impact on our lives. We all need that kind of information if we're actually going to take part in the democratic process and actually shape what our country is going to be, what kind of country it is. If companies are behaving badly and we don't know about it, it's very hard to call them to account. So freedom of the press is absolutely essential if we're going to be able to do that job of calling people to account and then making decisions about whether we want to support their companies, whether we want to support their political parties and so on.
Religious freedom in general, not just for the church, but religious freedom for all people is profoundly important because religion above all is a matter of the conscience. It's a matter of things which are beyond all other obligations. It's one's relationship with the creator of everything and one's ethical responsibilities and behaviour in wider society. And the two are in constant interplay. And if the ethics and the faith that underpins those ethics are not free, but are controlled from outside, then religion has very little value. If we solely have to conform to something which is imposed upon us, then we cannot honour the faith we represent. And that's a complex equation because, of course, we are also, whatever our faith, we are citizens of a society. We owe obligations to the people around us and the society and the state in which we live. But we also owe an obligation to our conscience, to good faith in ourselves.
HACTOF was set up in 2011 and its immediate purpose was to call for a public inquiry into the press. That was almost immediately granted and the Leveson Inquiry was set up. And the reason why that was necessary was it was gradually becoming clear that certain parts of the press had embarked on wholesale criminal activities in order to get stories. And people were being told, myself included, that their phones had been hacked by journalists at the News of the World. So in my case, it was very ironic because in 2004, I was writing a regular column for the Times newspaper. What I didn't find out until 7 years later when the police approached me was that the News of the World at the same time was paying a private detective to spy on my phone calls. So one part of that newspaper empire was paying me to write for them. Another part of that newspaper empire was paying a private detective to listen to my voicemails.
Well, I think it's very important that we have freedom of religion because people should be able to worship a God as they understand God, and that they should be able to do that without constraint as long as they don't in any fashion have a negative influence on somebody else. And so just part of what it means to be a free person, honoring the intent of the Magna Carta is very much connected with that. And in the Jewish community, we have a long historical memory, and we know that there were times when Jews were persecuted just because they had a different belief. And so the fact that we have an honor freedom of religion here in the United Kingdom is a blessing for everybody, for Jews, for Christians, for Muslims, for Buddhists, for anybody and everybody, whether they're part of the Hindu community, the Baha'i community. Freedom of religion is something which is a wonderful gift for all of us.
Journalists on those papers, I think, were not doing their job anymore. They weren't actually approaching people honestly and openly and pursuing stories. They were simply hacking people's private messages on an industrial scale, and people who'd suffered terrible things, bereavements and things like that. So that was why the Leveson Inquiry was set up, and what came out of that was a recommendation that the press should continue to regulate itself, but that there should be an element of independent oversight, so that instead of what's happened in the past, which is the press saying, if you want to complain, you can come to us and we'll investigate. But there's nobody actually checking that they're doing that job properly. The important thing that came out of Leveson, the Leveson Inquiry, was a requirement that the press should actually have, there should be an independent arbiter who would just look at the press and the body that was regulating it. And that's what Hacked Off exists to fight for, as well as a change in the culture of the press, because I'm a journalist. I believe in the free press. I don't want a press that bullies vulnerable people and abuses its own power.
This is part and parcel of our work, where we are trying to make sure that we become equal citizens and actually contribute to the good, common good. And this is done not through seeking any special measures, but justice and the freedom of religion and freedom of and other freedoms that come with it, social freedom, actually is very relevant to that.
Yes, absolutely a regulated press can be a free press, because I don't think that anybody, including in the industry, would say that the press should be completely unregulated, because there has to be a system of redress. Any organisation which has a lot of power, and the press does have a lot of power, there's always a temptation to abuse it, and we've seen the results in this country of that power being abused. So the purpose of regulation is to provide redress for a lot of people who are not very powerful and who don't have a lot of money, but are upset by the fact that a newspaper has got something wrong, or it's printed something that's untrue, very damaging, that's very distressing. There has to be a regulator. But the important thing is that regulator then has to have an outside oversight, because solicitors don't regulate themselves, the police don't regulate themselves, because we accept that the press has a very important role in society and a very important democratic role. We're still saying that yes, the press can regulate itself. All we're asking for at Hacked Off, and also the Leveson Inquiry came to the same conclusion, is there should be this independent oversight. So the press gets on with the job of regulating itself, but at certain points in the cycle, another body which is completely independent, and independent of politicians, by the way, comes along and says, well, how is this operating? Is it working in support of the public? And that's all we want. And so we want a press which is free and fearless, but actually is accountable. This is about accountability. So it's if a newspaper publishes a story about you or your best friend or your children which is untrue, which is very harmful and distressing, that there is a body you can go to and complain, and somebody checks to make sure that body is doing its job.